Oh, hello there. I didn't notice you. Today I'll be talking about MIZUKI Shigeru's Kashihon-era on Gaijin Gai. Hey Gaijin Gaigers, welcome to a very special episode of Gaijin Gai where I focus on a very specific period of manga legend MIZUKI Shigeru's early kashihon career. Now, I'm not a MIZUKI expert. The man has an incredible amount of work. Him and his production team continue to produce comics up until the very end of his life. So I'm just beginning to scratch the surface. Please join me on a visit through space and time to look at the US comics influences of MIZUKI Shigeru.
And by the way, we've cracked the 100 subscriber barrier, so very excited. Thank you for your support.
First of all, I want to preface this discussion by saying that what I'm sharing in this video is not any kind of huge bombshell, nor is it my discovery. MIZUKI's borrowings are well known and undeniable. It was Dave Merrill who first brought MIZUKI's Rocket Man and Plastic Man works to my attention a few years ago. From there I discovered translator and author Zach Davison's blog and post in English that referenced manga critic Natsume Fusanosuke's blog, where he talks about how he came across the book Four Color Fear, Forgotten Horror Comics of the 1950s, a book edited by Sadowski and Benson, which includes a plethora of non-EC, pre-comics code horror stories, and which manga scholar and translator Dr. Ryan Holmberg happened to order while he was doing research at the uni where Natsume teaches. Natsume noticed the similarities from two different stories to art from MIZUKI's Kashihon days. It was after this that I started looking through MIZUKI's works for influences. Now I want to understand that every artist, everyone, has been inspired by and has swiped from other artists. That's how artistic movements get started. Hey, look at what that guy's doing. That's cool as hell. I'm gonna do my take on it. Every comic guy worth his salt has had a big old filing cabinet with folders full of photos, clippings, and comics panels. Now in MIZUKI, here's the guy who lost an arm in the war, but still wants to make a living as an artist, even though the pay isn't great. He's making 10-panel stories for Kamishibai paper theater publishers for a pittance, but it's work. The problem is that Kamishibai was losing popularity. Luckily, MIZUKI's invited to make comics for Kashihon publishers who paid a little bit better. Now at this exact juncture in his career, MIZUKI's father, who worked for the occupational government and was worried about his son, has a mess of US comics left by GIs or whatever, and sends them off to his son in hopes of helping his son out. Well, it does help him out, because the mixture of MIZUKI's panels and the US comic swipes gives him a definitive look that establishes him as an up-and-coming Kashihon manga artist. I don't have to tell you where the inspiration for Rocket Man, Plastic Man and Plastic Boy, and Pyonsky the Rabbit came from. Wait a minute, you say, that's play. Well, yes. But here's what's interesting. MIZUKI didn't copy whole pages or stories like what was happening in the Akahon market, where you had bootleg issues of New Treasure Island floating around that had been hand traced. He took some panels and some layout ideas and mixed them in with his own art to make clever, quirky, even hilarious stories. From the get-go, he had this uniquely singular voice that permeated everything he did. And that's why all the titles I mentioned are still in print as part of the Mizuki collection. Mizuki himself has stated, as quoted in an article written by mangaka and gekiga researcher Kawakatsu Tokushige in the Kashihon Manga History Research, Volume 2, Number 2, during Mizuki's Kashihon days, he swiped from popular magazine artists like Takano Yoshiteru, who I've mentioned in the weekly magazine video, and other sources because that's what publishers wanted. And that's what he had to do to feed his new family. Mizuki wasn't a teen or even in his 20s when he started doing comics, so he had extra pressure from his parents to start a family, even though he wasn't a stable breadwinner yet. Okay, that's enough background. What I want to show you today is one of his absolute favorite panels from his absolute favorite story from what must have been his absolute all-time favorite US horror comic. And that would be Harvey's Chamber of Chills number 17 from 1953. The story I want to talk about is Amnesia by Warren Kramer and Howard Nostrand. It's likely that Kramer did layouts and inking over Nostrand's pencils, but I can't confirm this. Kramer was art director for Harvey's horror comics and went on to redesign Casper the Friendly Ghost, co-create Richie Rich, and create several iconic Harvey characters. His style became the house style of Harvey Comics, much like Dan DeCarlo's designs became the established style for Archie Comics. Nostrand was a Harvey house artist who especially shined on their horror books. Now, the Amnesia story is about an amnesiac who wanders through a graveyard and into a creepy house to discover that he is in fact, spoiler alert, the devil. Now here's the panel that I'm going to focus on in this video. It's not the cool ultimate evil of Satan in the last panel, but the vulnerable slack-jawed guy who is in obvious shock from a terrible discovery. Now you can see Mizuki's priority was not with the monstrous scare, but the incredibly relatable moment in which one's world is turned upside down. Now, in early uses of the panel, we can see a more direct influence from the original. But as time goes on, Mizuki made it his own. It often tends to be this bottom inside right panel, but not always. Okay, this is Hakaba Kitaro. This is the very first comic iteration of Kitaro by Mizuki. And there you can see he used this panel and other panels a number of times, but my eye always immediately goes to this panel. And you can see, yo. So at the early on in his use of the panels, he used that sound effect, gyo, quite a bit. So I started even calling it the gyo panel, but then later on, changes. Very similar use. You can tell basically what part of the career. You can easily pick out the American comics influence panels versus his own original style quite easily. But depending on the work, they're used different ways. Sometimes with sound effects, sometimes not. I don't know if that one necessarily qualifies. I don't seem to have volume 3, so unfortunately I couldn't check that one. There's a double, which I find quite interesting. Already he's working through this and making it really his own thing. And so there's a lot more synergy between his panels. But it's his go-to, gyo, for the surprise take. Gyo. There's gyo again. Okay, it morphs from gyo to ah. Still, a surprise take, but less of the focus on the sound effect gyo, which is kind of gives you the feeling of eyes bugging out of their head. There's a ha. Still surprise. And then there's dialogue. Ah. And this is one of the rare uses of Kitaro actually doing the surprise take. Ah. So this is still kashihon-era. Now, I don't know if this qualifies, but the loopy mouth and the big eyes, I think, make it a possible. And this is more of the natural Mizuki style, but he really went with the asymmetrical mouth, asymmetrical faces, and so definitely it was an influence on his work. So now what this is not kashihon. This is actually published in magazines, but you can see he still kind of goes to the same look again and again, because it's a great dramatic take for a reaction shot. And the asymmetrical mouth is, oh, this is unrelated. That's another swipe from a different comic. Actually, the same comic, different volume. Chamber of Chills. Let's go. Okay, yeah, this is eventually what Mizuki's surprise take developed into. So this is the more consistent Mizuki style. Most of the American comics influence had been kind of taken out, but you can see still there's traces. You know, later in his career, it was his production company that was responsible for finishing a lot of the art. So you can see that it's still Gyo, but the character looks different, you know. He's been cleaned up. There's the Gyo again. This is the same story in the first Hakaba. The same story in this, but everybody looks different. The mummy, which is actually Kitaro's dad, also looks different. You know, not the same. So, you know, they wanted to bring it into maybe make it a little bit less scary and a little bit more homogenized, which, you know, makes sense because his style had developed. All right. So, as per the discussion of swiping, etc., before you go throwing stones at glass houses built 60-some years ago in an occupied country just struggling to get back on its feet, know that there are very few innocents in this four-color game known as the comics. And man, I know that sounds cynical, but Amnesia's Kramer and Nostrand and other Harvey artists were told specifically by the publisher to copy the style of popular EC artists like Harvey Kurtzman, Wallace Wood, and Jack Davis, and Nostrand was particularly good at channeling Wood and Davis. Amnesia would be completely plagiarized and reworked by eerie publications as Graveyard by Eugenio Zappi in their Terror Tales Volume 4, Number 5 from 1972, and would be republished 2 more times in different Eerie publication magazines. No relation to the Warren Eerie magazine. In fact, most of Eerie's stories were from grave-robbing old Harvey horror comics. So I hope this has been enlightening. It's definitely been a journey for me. I learned a lot, and I have even deeper respect for Mizuki's work, because what he's done with what he swiped, with what he learned from those comics, he didn't stop at that level. You know, once he got into the weekly magazines, he kept pushing forward his art, his style, to become one of the most recognizable styles and to become one of the most important horror-related artists in Japanese comics history. I wonder whatever happened to his comic collection. You know, I know that Tezuka's collection is still kept by Tezuka Pro thanks to Dr. Holmberg's investigations, and I heard from Matsumoto Reiji himself that his collection is substantial, but he just doesn't know where it all is. He has just way too big of a collection. Maybe someday we'll learn more. Anyway, thanks for joining me, and I hope to see you back here on Gaijin Guy.